Alright, good afternoon Earth, this is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting distressed hue, still working on line work for the IREP. I thought I was just going to do this in chunks and only video portions of it, but I think for the sake of the entire process video and twisting the camera angle as I twist the canvas would make for a fun flipping or a little spiraling moment in the process video. So I'm going to video the whole thing, splice these together, and then tack this longer segment onto the process movie probably for anybody that's masochistic enough to want to watch the whole thing. It'll be there. Alright, so here we go.
Writing is clearly a technology, and it's a technology for what? For freezing thought, for downloading information into a non-degradable medium, for perfect recall. It's the long road to digitizing begins with writing, and our relationship to the past, which is time, notice, changes with these technologies. Language was clearly a strategy for binding time. That's what you do with it. That's why we live in a different kind of time world than the animals do. They don't refer back to the time when I encountered a threat exactly like this one. Substitute that kind of process with instinct. But as we moved away from instinct, we moved into these information-based technologies, writing, then the book, and in our own time, an explosion of technologies that have frozen all time. I mean, we now know from movies like Forrest Gump that people who never even lived at the same time can mingle together in the collective cultural memory. Marilyn Monroe can have an affair with Albert Einstein in cyberspace. What it means to both of them since they're dead, I'm not sure. But what it means to the rest of us is whatever we make of it. So technology has this curious accelerating quality that is so important now as we what I call the transcendental object at the end of time. It is being mirrored in our machines, in the machines that we are creating. And the most dramatic machines that we are creating, completely unhindered by the petty bourgeois and its concerns, hour by hour, day by day, around the clock, an enormous invisible technology is knitting itself into existence. And it doesn't change the look of the landscape, but it is drawing together human beings to the point where all minds on the planet are simultaneously inhabiting a cultural superspace. This is called the Internet, the World Wide Web. And what it is it's a recreation through engineering technology of the kind of telepathic, archaic social space that we lived in before the fall into history. History is a huge downer. It literally
Alright, I'm going to wrap
was the
the
state of
faces
mind that
around
rushed
this
in
and
to fill
leave
the
this open.
vacuum when
So
through the abandonment of psychedelics,
it'll be easier.
we broke the connection.
And because it gives it some perspective and
And
ascension,
now,
sort of
strange to say,
conceptual quality,
at the very
but also
apex of
because it
this
would be kind of
process
impossible
of
to conjoin the
alienation
faces
and
without leaving a line of eyes
entrancement,
compositionally that
we're
I just wouldn't
finding
care for.
that technology can be a
if you can hear
mirror
any of that,
for
there
Gaian
was.
intent. That we can't manage ourselves without genuflecting to these higher levels of managerial coordination that the Internet makes possible. I think, in a way, what we're doing is we're erasing the boundaries between technology and nature. The Internet now is something which runs along telephone lines and is transduced through computers. But in 20 and 15 years, those computers will be simply black patches pasted on the back of your fingernails. The entire infrastructure, the technical appurtenances that protrude into three-dimensional space can be turned into prosthetic implants and earwax and who knows what else, and serve us very diligently in that form. So it's very clear that visually we are returning to an archaic mode, but carrying with us all the presuppositions of technological existence. And I'm not sure whether we can maintain our hold on the human form, or whether we will even want to. There's a great bifurcation ahead for the managerial community. Let's assume it exists, for God's sake. And that bifurcation is, we're going to have to make a decision about human nature. To wit, is this our home to be cherished and nurtured, an incredible pearl flung out in a universe of ashes and darkness? Or is this a hell world, a tiny confining prison at the edge of a dying universe from which it is our destiny to break free and recover our higher and hidden nature from which we have become separated? It's very hard to see how we're able to massage the data so we can have it both ways. And yet, this is a choice which as a culture we face. Are we to go into the divine imagination and create, starships the size of Manitoba that will ply between here and Andromeda and exist in a world of our complete syntactical self-expression? Or is man's place humbler than that? Is that grandiose, steeped with megalomania, touched with the kind of political taint that's had us raping and pillaging ever since we got out of those miserable icebound villages in Jutland or wherever it was? Is it that? Or is it our challenge and our destiny? It's really a choice about human nature, and who knows, there may be enough activity in the mix that we can divide the tribe. A meek shall inherit the earth deal, and where the other people go is not said. But I think that as individuals, and I guess this is really, for you personally, maybe what makes this all important. As individuals, we have been too willing to be taught and led, when what is really out there to blow your mind is not some regurgitation of previously achieved conclusions, but experience. The world is far weirder than the maddest among us suppose. The guy gibbering in the stairwell and excreting in your window box. It's better than he can suppose. And the key to understanding this is not brainless gullibility. I mean, if you're just brainlessly gullible and buy into everything which comes down the pike, then the world is stranger than you can suppose, and you don't even have to leave your apartment. But what's interesting is you can be hard-nosed. You can be a rationalist. You can be a show-me kind of person. You can be from Missouri, and you can still satisfy yourself that the world is freakish beyond the wildest imaginings of George Bush or even Billy Clinton. And the key to doing this is to push the edges. We shouldn't huddle together in cities around collective activities sanctioned by the great corporations that have done so much for us. We should break out, go to the edge, and I know there are many edges in theory: sexuality, drugs, travel. There must be others. Art appreciation. After all, it doesn't all have to be sweat and tumble, you know. And some of these work better than others for some people. I mean, for some people, sex is no big deal. For some people, travel is no big deal. Terrible pain in the neck. They have to fly to Paris. They can't stand it. For some people, psychedelics are no big deal. I mean, don't ask me how they manage that. I assume they're either not taking enough or but maybe there are people who find Paris boring and can turn away from squirm as well. I don't know. On my agenda, these were the things that worked: sexuality, psychedelic drugs, and travel. Because they break patterns, because they inject novelty. And, you know, travel is great and sex is a wonderful domestic activity, but psychedelics hold the key in this domain of absolutely astonishing you until you're just gasping for breath and flopping around on the ground. I mean, when was the last time that you were actually sick with amazement? When was the last time you were actually white with sheer terror? Probably, unless you've been caught in automobile accidents or landslides, it was a psychedelic experience. Because these things deliver authentic emotion, authentic data. And the bum bit of history is that it depotentiates human individuals. Just in order to live inside a historical society, you have to sculpt yourself down and down and down. You mustn't be in other people's face. You mustn't thrust your ethnicity or your gender or your tattoo or whatever it is too you mustn't flaunt. Everything is confined. This is the attitude of history. It's what's called being part of the public. The public is a concept that was created in the Renaissance. It was created by print. There never before was that notion. It's something necessary for democracies to do business. There has to be a public. But when we identify with the public, we essentially become creatures of the herd. Eccentricity is mitigated against. That's why this very small flute theme called Bohemianism just will not die in Western civilization. You know, it's always been there. It was there before rave, before punk, before rock and roll, before jazz, before the Impressionists, before the Romantics, back. There was always this strain of dissent, because it's the lifeline of sanity in West society. And every time the bastions of bullshittery grow weak, the bohemian thread expands its options, offers itself as an alternative. And I don't think this is an eternal dance of frustration. I think eventually this archaic return, which is what this bohemian thing has always represented, will be felt, will be heard. We have very little time now. If I believed that salvation had to come from political institutions, I would just throw up my hands in despair. It's very hard for people sometimes to figure out whether I'm an optimist or not. Let's get something straight here. I am the most optimistic person you have ever met. I'm absolutely convinced that there is nothing wrong, and that nothing can go wrong, and that nothing will go wrong, and that if something needs to be done, you will find yourself doing it. Now, all purveyors of this kind of goody two-shoes point of view have to then come to terms with, well, then how come the world is such a terrible place? Well, it's a terrible place because it is an interference pattern composed of many times and many places. And there is no peace until the end. There is no let-up in pressure until the end. As we approach the transcendental object at the end of time, history moves faster and faster. We have been approaching this transcendental object since before there was a we to speak of in human terms. In other words, this is the same attractor that pulled life out of the oceans, caused primates to stand on their hind legs, and so forth and so on. But obviously, pick a number, about 20,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, the process quickened. We turned a corner. Everything began to move faster. And again, at the fall of Rome, faster, faster. And again, in the 20th century, faster, faster, faster. Well, nobody has drawn the obvious conclusion from this. If we're going faster and faster, faster and faster, then hell, we're going to get somewhere pretty soon. And that's where I think we are. We can hardly go any faster without the speed of our acceleration passing into the domains of humanly cognizable time. In other words, the reason things are getting weirder and weirder is because the space-time continuum itself is accelerating. It's entirely possible that the last half of the life of the universe will happen in about 3% of the total life of the universe. Nobody said that it has to take as long going down as it took to come up. It may be that the coming up took a long, long time, and the going down can be catastrophic, sudden, unexpected, dynamic, we say. And that's why I take and I return to this theme, because hey, I return to all themes. But I return to this theme now, that history is an anticipation. History is the last call that the train is leaving the station. You know, and the call echoes back to Çatalhöyük and slightly beyond. But in our own lifetime, it's now palpable. You know, all you have to do is close your eyes in a quiet place, twist up a bomber, think, and you will behold the transcendental object at the end of time. You can feel it informing your own life. I mean, you spend a good deal of time denying it because rationalists tell you you're either losing your mind or it's impossible and it can't be happening. But this sense of plottedness, of connectedness, this sense that we are all in a universal drama playing to a close, this sense that we are larger than ourselves, that we are somehow characters on a stage. This is a phenomenon of the light at eventide. This is a phenomenon of the final moments of the cosmic drama. And I think it's tremendously exciting. I think this is what nature set about 700 million years ago on this planet. That it's not about chipmunk after chipmunk after chipmunk for eon after eon after eon. I mean, a little of that goes a long ways. I'm sure you'll agree with me. That's all very fine, but the way nature works is she builds upon her complexity. Having achieved one level of complexity, it sinks into the background and becomes the platform for yet further complexity. So out of molecules comes life. Out of life comes climaxed ecosystems. Out of those ecosystems, higher animals. Out of higher animals, human beings. out of human beings technologically motivated human beings, and out of them something which we can barely imagine, and many of us don't even want to try. We can feel that we're more than animal. We have this dimension which we call spiritual, and some of us buy into some off-the-shelf explanation. Catholicism, Mormonism, Jainism, something like that. Others of us wrestle with it, or we smorgasbord it into, a little couple of Taoism, a little Tantra, a little Hasidism. It doesn't, do that. But whatever it is, we wrestle with this part of ourselves which cannot be simply dismissed as monkey meat. And I think that it is the soul, that the soul is actually an entity in history seeking to be born, and that the enterprise of history is the creation of the collectivity as an eternal, indestructible, trans-dimensional object of some sort, the tool at the end of time. Now, I've quoted probably to you before this thing from Yeats about once out of nature I would be a thing of gold and enameling, set to sing before the lords and ladies of Byzantium of what has been and what will be. In other words, out of organic existence comes something not exactly inorganic, but not exactly organic, a mechanical nightingale, fit to sing before the Emperor of Byzantium. This is what the flying saucer is, in my estimation. It's nothing more than an organometallic projection of the future state of the human soul. We are literally like caterpillars, or the components of a slime mold. We are undergoing a series of chemical signals and transductions of change that are preparing us to become unimaginable to ourselves. And there's no way out. The only place in nature where you see this is with caterpillars on limited food plants, where the caterpillars eat without a thought in their minds until there's nothing left. And then they go into shock from hunger, and they begin to spin, and their enzyme systems go crazy, and hundreds of genes are suppressed, and thousands of genes are turned on simultaneously, and lo and behold, the caterpillar changes into something completely different, an organism of a completely different order. I have never heard a Darwinian evolutionary biologist explain how gradual evolution could get you the coordination of thousands of genes required in that process. Be that as it may, that is what we're involved in, and the enzymatic juice of this process is technology. And, if when I say technology, you think of D9 caterpillars and freeways and stuff like that, then you're driving using your rear view mirror. By technology, I mean steam engines that you can put 50 inside the human hair. Some of you may have seen.
All right, it's getting tricky. That's going to wrap this session up.
First question.
All right, so we've gotten about, half, maybe 2/3 in of the eye, except the lower portions are a little bit wider, or a little longer. So, or the upper portion actually now is a little bit longer, so it might take a little bit more time. So I may just do another session or two on this and see how far we get today with that and call it good. But it's starting to come together. It's a little tricky right here on this bend, so I've had to squish some eyes and squeeze some eyes and might have put a nose out of place or two, but I think it'll all come together in the end.
So I don't blame guys for that. They did it. I think women should not accept second positioning in this. There's a lot of things about cyberspace that are out of balance at the moment. For instance, unless you have very, very good equipment and very, very cooperative telephone company, then what you're dealing with now is text. Well, text is deadly. And just, it could be the Sermon on the Mount scrolling by. And if you've been looking at the screen for hours, it's not interesting. But now, with things called slip connections and ISDN lines and this sort of thing, the net is going visual. And it's becoming a land of cartoons and movies and home video and visual jokes and beautiful constructions. So I'm hopeful that this in itself will inspire women to get on. The net right now is arguably fairly soulless. It's there to be taken over. I mean, in case you don't understand exactly what is being talked about here, the internet is not a computer network. It's not something owned by anybody. It's the network of the networks. And it was designed by the military in order to survive a thermonuclear war. Consequently, it was designed in such a way that no one can destroy it or stop it, including the people who created it. It's the old Frankenstein to the rescue story. So I think it's up to people like ourselves, without characterizing us, to make an impact on the net and to get the heart in there. 2 months ago, Wired magazine published a poll or a statistical table showing what net sites on the web had been most visited in the previous 30 days. And alt.sex.stories was number one. alt.pic.erotic was number two. 500,000 people accessed these two conferences in the previous 40-day period. Well, now, when you know that there are only 30 million people on the net, 500,000 is, what? 1 in 12. 1 in 12 of those people accessed that. Well, now, I'm not sure alt.pic.erotic qualifies as heart, but hey, they're trying, right? What it indicates is that this most technical of instrumentality, most global of technologies, what people use it for is to try and get a date, for crying out loud, what they've always used technologies for. So I don't think it has a character in and of itself. It's a paradox, the machine thing, because, it's all men. Men design them, men implement them, men, and yet the thing is incredibly feminine. It is a feminine thing. It is, if it has a gender, it is a goddess. It's dissolving, it's distributed, it's maternal, it rocks you in its arms. So in a way what we have here is a kind of a cult of a cybernetic goddess where all of the acolytes are not exactly castrati, but nerds, Probably enough blathering about heart on the net. But it's a good question. There will be as much heart on the net as we put into the net.
My thing on the net is that it's really our first opportunity to bypass political structure and media editing and connect human to human. And I think as such we're going to enter a super democracy and actually a time where humans are connecting with each other more than ever. I mean, is that?
No, I absolutely agree. One of the things that Tim Leary used to say was he used to say, find the others. find the others. Well, with the net, you can find the others. I mean, you can be into record building, gerbil raising, and leather, and find 300 people who share those precise interests. And you can immediately form an interest group, begin exchanging email, and do whatever you want. It's incredibly empowering to eccentricity. Eccentricity is empowered. I mean, there isn't an interest obscure enough that you can't get together 5 people on the internet. I mean, there's enormous conferences, for instance, on the Voynich manuscript. Who's ever heard of it? Enormous conferences on deciphering the angelologic languages that Dr. Dee channeled in his channelings in the late 16th century. 60 people on the net are working on this around the world, exchanging data. It's incredibly empowering for anyone who is trying to solve a specific kind of problem, or find like-minded people, or organize. And what it's doing is it's destroying the myth of the public. I mean, I don't want to spend all evening on this, but I'm a hard, dyed-in-the-wool McLuhanist. And really what the net is doing is destroying the uniformity of culture created by print. You see, print worked effects on us that most of us even today are not aware of. The way our cities are laid out, the way we elect people to high office, the way we manufacture an object with interchangeable parts manufactured at various places and brought together and assembled at one point. These are all modeled on how a book was made in the 16th century. The uniformity of print, the repeatability of has created the uniformity of modern mass media and the concept of the citizen, which is, not you and not me. It's this ideal which we are educated into in an educational system created and based on the values of print. That's right. So McLuhan said as long ago as 1965
I'm going to have to kind of fudge that area in order to accomplish the bend.
A global village.
I might be able to fix it if I erased it and did it all again.
Familiar? The guy was just 30 years too early. He said the nation state will dissolve. He said there will be only 2 levels, the local level and the planetary level. And all the levels in between will be seen to be irrelevant. This is now happening, and propelled by these nonlinear forms of media, of which I take psychedelics and psychedelics to be 2 sides of the same coin. I mean, after all, think about psychedelics. They're called consciousness expanding drugs. Consciousness expanding. If I can search the Encyclopedia Britannica for a fact and find it in less than 1/3 of a second, that's consciousness expanding. If I can know the weather in Madrid instantly, that's consciousness expanding. I think I told you in January, the only difference between computers and drugs is that computers are too large to swallow. And our best people are working on that. I mean, the drugs, the computers of the future will be the size of aspirin tablets and cost the same, and be used with the same devil-may-care attitude. So consciousness expansion is the name of the game, and God knows we need it, because look at the chuckle-headed solutions we are trying to apply to our desperate problems. Look at how our politicians behave. I mean, they're a disgrace. In any civilized country, they would be ripped apart by howling mobs. But here, a certain mellowness has set in, and we just don't have that kind of conviction like we used to. Not to rave, yeah.
Relationship with your audience might be more perhaps through the net. What are your specific plans
Well, what a nice question. Well, the question is, what are my specific plans for the net? I am convinced that this theory, which I made reference to tonight about novelty and the end of time and so forth, I spared you the mathematics, but I am not a soft-headed thinker, at least not of the ordinary kind. I can boil a rap down to an equation that you can write on a blackboard or run on a computer. And I've discovered something fascinating enough, in my judgment, that I will spend the rest of my life trying to convey it to the rest of you. And I've decided that what I'm lacking in this effort is a very large, chronologically organized, image-based historical database. That's what I want. I want a historical database that records everything that can be known about the past, starting with the Big Bang and running up to whatever General Cedras said today. And because with a database like that, I'm convinced that I can sell my theory to a skeptical world. I'm also convinced that even if you think my theory is hokum anyway, this historical database should be built anyway. Because one of the things about our modern neurotic dysfunctionalism is that it has the character, as I analyze it, of a kind of amnesia. We are people who have lost our memories. You know, quick, who fought the 30 Years' War? Quick, did it come before or after the War of the Roses? What is a Huguenot? And so forth, and so on, and so forth, and so on. We do not know jack shit about who we are, where we came from, how we got here, or why things are as they are. And there's no excuse for it. The libraries are full of it. It's just that we have lost faith in the idea of cultural continuity. And I think that that the time wave, as I call my theory, in conjunction with a large historical database, you could begin to give people back their history. And then they would understand how we got in this mess, and they would be far less easy to manipulate. This is slightly off the point, but I'll make it anyway. I believe that the social explosions of the 1960s were a partial consequence of the Vietnam War, a partial consequence of the large use of psychedelics in the population, but more important than either of those factors was the fact that a generation of kids came of age superbly educated in the nature, history, politics, and theory of Western civilization. Essentially, the American dream perfected itself in my generation. I came out of the university, I had read Plato, Hobbes, Schopenhauer, Jeremy Bent, the whole bit. I knew it backwards and forwards. And what did we do? We people who had all this information, who finally grasped the light, we got stoned, and then we did something else. We heaved rocks through the windows of the banks, overturned police cars, set buildings on fire, and said enough. And I believe that the American establishment took a look at that and said, the idea of universal public education is a no-brainer from the point of view of control freaks. These universities are a nightmare. Let's turn them into trade schools, give everybody an MBA, teach them how to operate a computer keyboard and keep their mouths shut. And that's what was done. The dumbing down of America. It happened all through the 70s, and the 80s. It's still going on. I mean, I am not a conspiracy theorist of the ordinary stripe, but I tell you, somewhere back around Baby M began, and it went on to be about the skaters. And then it became about the Menendez brothers. And then it became about O.J. The Bobbits, they were in there too, thank you. And Michael Jackson, we all talk about all this, but do you know what this is a substitute for? It's a substitute for having a life and a culture, is what it's a substitute for. You may bet that as you worry about the Bobbits and the Menendez and O.J., really awful things are being done somewhere in the world where your attention is not focused. And this dumbing down of the American public is I think, a really insidious thing, because it's very clear that what's happening is, through these new technologies, a kind of super elite is being created. I've used this thing called the World Wide Web, where you bring up a page of text, and it looks like an ordinary word processor document. Certain words are slightly colored blue. When you click on those words, those are buttons.
Alright, I think we're about ready to flip the canvas again. Once again, I had to kind of finagle a few of those faces, and noses and eyes aren't quite where they should be. With strict adherence to the pattern. But it works, and it's tricky to bend them and shrink them at the same time. So I think once it's all filled and shaded and worked, it'll work. So we'll see.
I realized this is a camera in the Louvre. The moment it's alive in real time. Now I bring the clicker down and I click on The Temptation of St. Anthony by Hieronymus Bosch. A camera is turned on in the National Gallery in Lisbon in Portugal. Now I'm seeing
Alright, so that sets in most of it, this final session, or I'm hoping I can do this last segment here and the next 27-minute segment on the memory. If not, I'll do two and conjoin them, and then post all three of these videos separately with a process photo again for another progress photo of the day. That's, two in one day. It's usually not how I work. I try and change paintings, but this one I'm really excited about the interlocking eye ascension sort of effect, and also I have enough color mixed up to do it, so it's probably smarter to get it all lined in and the patterning at least set today, so I can start working on other aspects of it, and I might work on something else later. But thanks for your patience, and here goes the last bit, hopefully. Got too many problems this time. Rag's getting a little work on this, but difficult bends happening in the brush work of the initial
that means theoretically in a gram of LSD there are 10,000 doses.
I'm trying to make it follow it.
Compound, it is comparable
But
in strength, and it is
it works in
LSD is
most of the places. I think it'll be okay when it's done.
made from ergot, but it's a synthetic. The new compound
Alright, but here's the
is
tricky part.
entirely from a plant. The new compound, well, here's the deal. For years and years, a phrase you may learn to loathe as Ross Perot gains ascendance. For years, the psychedelic literature has carried the notation that there was this obscure Mexican mint which some Indians, under some conditions, claimed was intoxicating, and nobody could ever get off on it. It's sort of like Rupert's theory of morphogenetic fields. Now that we know how to get off on salvia divinorum, it's impossible to understand how we could have overlooked it all these years. But it is a mega experience of some sort. The plant is like a house plant. It can be grown anywhere. It can be grown in Hawaii like crazy outside. It looks like Joe Plant. There's nothing, nothing defining about it. It's just a plant. The way I like to do it is I take between 16 and 20 leaves and I lay them down and I remove the mid-vein with my fingernail. This is because this is how the Indians told the anthropologist who busted the story. This is exactly how they do it. They remove the mid-vein. And then what I do is I make this little soft pancake pile of leaves, and it folds down to just about one enormous mouthful. It's the absolute limit of what I can get in my mouth. And then what I do is I lay down in silent darkness where I can see a digital clock. And I lay there, and you have this enormous thing in your mouth. I mean, this is like, and then slowly it softens. And every time you bring your jaw down on it, you expel this hideous liquid that just coats the inside of your mouth and all the mucous membrane and everything. And then, 15 minutes by the clock. No, you spit it out. You spit it into a little bowl or a Kleenex or the receptacle of your choice. After 15 minutes. Then, somewhere between minute 16 and 19, as you're lying there, you just don't move, you just lie there in the dark, it will begin to do what's called streaming. You know what that is? It's these after-image colored purple and chartreuse overstuffed things floating by in your visual field. That's called streaming. Then within a minute or two, it will become dramatically peculiar, visually peculiar. Someone said, and this was my impression, actually, well, no, I shouldn't say their name because they may not want to go down with me into druggy fame. But anyway, a famous person said, it's really stretchy. And I said, yes, remember that painting by Salvador Dali called Soft Beans Construction, Ode to the Revolution #4? Study that puppy sometime. That's what's happening. Everything is stretching and falling away and sort of interdimensional. I've done it a number of times. And once I got it to work, it's worked every time since. And I think it's a very interesting hallucinogen. The last time I did it, it was amazing because in a darkened room with moonlight streaming through a big skylight, there was no hallucinogenic activity whatsoever. I mean, that's where you would expect it. You know, you have all the edges, the moonlights, the perfect situation for hallucination. Nothing, crystal clear. But when you close your eyes, instantly, there are complex three-dimensional hallucinations moving and rotating. So quickly does it form that you have the impression it's like turning on a light in a darkened room. And unlike DMT or psilocybin, where usually when you get these weird hallucinations, you can just sit and look at it and think about it. Say, I am seeing a strange hallucination. It is very weird shit. It is partially strawberry jelly, partially welding, partially what I found in my mother's drawer when I was something like that. But what I noticed on the salvia was that it sort of, it crept around behind me, and the observing mind began to speak gibberish. And then I didn't know where I was in the circuit because the observer was being messed with. I think that the key to using this substance and to not getting it scheduled, I mean, dig what the situation is right now. This is legal to talk about. legal to take, legal to give to people. I could smoke it right now. I could choose one of you and bring you up here. We could hold a weekend where we claim this did you some good, and we could do it. We could manufacture it. We could transport it. We could put ads in newspapers selling it. It is legal, you know, legal. Remember legal? Okay, that's what it is. It's legal. Well, is it a good trip? Well, that's a good question. A very well-known researcher took it, who has a big academic position and so forth, and he told me, he said, it was a complete psychotic break. He said, I had no idea who I was or what I was doing. I gave it to an acquaintance of mine who is a more, how shall we put it, earthy person, and he said to me, if you want this stuff to be a success, you should throw all the eggheads off the bandwagon because they're giving it a bad name. It's simply a great load. So I don't know whether it's a great load or a complete psychotic. It depends on how many degrees you've collected, where it puts you. Well, let me talk a little bit more about the plant, because the plant is on Maui. I mean, somebody sitting no more than 8 feet away from you is keeping their mouth very shut at this point. It's here. People know about it. I think we should do the plant and not attempt to extract or commercialize the substance, because here's the thing. The substance is active at the 200 microgram level, just like LSD was. But unlike LSD, you smoke this stuff. That means there's no way back. And with the pure compound, do you know what 200 micrograms looks like? It looks like, you know, a pissant's box lunch. It's not much. It's like a grain or two of salt. Well, you can tell people are going to do too much. They're going to do too much because it's easy to do 10 times too much, 20 times. And we have no human data on the pure compound. Now, human data on the plant, we have these Indians. But everything at this point about this plant, these people are...
Pause for window puttying supplies there, trying to get a window fixed as well today, and making some progress on it. So I'm trying to keep this rolling in between doing that, but I'm getting closer, so we still got another 27-minute segment. I'll splice that first session onto this.
Well, now, this is fascinating. That's impossible if they've been using it in time. No culture on earth has something which it's been using for a long time, for which it has no name. That's preposterous. And so you say to them, how come you have no words in Mixtec for this plant? And they say, because it's new. And then the taxonomists get into the act, and they say, that's impossible. This plant is not known from anywhere else on this planet. It's only been collected in the Sierra Mazateca of southern Mexico among these people who have no name for it in their own language and who claim it's new. Well, I don't want to push the conclusion, but on Maui I probably would be led to it by half of you. It appears that this plant has no history. It came literally out of nowhere. And now, here's something interesting about it. We have in this country a very complex drug law called, I can't remember, it's called the Cogener Enantiomer Structural Near Relative Law. What it says is that the district attorney or his appointed stooge can declare a substance illegal without any scientific evidence or any medical evidence, provided that that substance is an enantiomer, stereoisomer, cogener, or structural near relative of an already scheduled compound. This isn't. This isn't. This isn't. So in order to make this stuff illegal, for the first time time since the 1960s, the government is going to, in the clear light of day, and hopefully in the clear light of reason, is going to have to scientific and medical evidence as to why this should not be illegal. And I don't think they'll be able to do it. I think there may be a case against the pure compound, although I can imagine a dosage system that would work. You could put it up on paper just like acid, but not eat the paper, smoke it, but dose it at regular doses. But I think we should all grow this plant and make no big deal about it. It's in a very interesting place in the spectrum. It's a lot stronger than any cannabis in any form other than eaten. And it's truly psychedelic on the psilocybin LSD scale, but it's brief. It only lasts about 45 minutes. It's very manageable. So as far as I can tell, taste is a problem, and some people are working on breeding palatable strains, but yeah, there is a palatable strain, as they go. But I think we could be on the brink of a craze here, folks. Where can one get a start? Well, first of all, ask around, because there's plenty of it growing on Maui. Otherwise, these exotic plant dealers are on to the fact that this is happening. And very easy to grow, very easy to use, totally legal, safe. Psychotherapists who are worried about other substances where they may have a legal problem can use this safely. And I think that we have been screaming, we, the psychedelic community, for 20 years for a fair hearing. Over the top of them and establish a shamanic plant with a history of shamanic and sacramental use, and if we can do that and demonstrate that it can be used without society exploding at its foundations, the one argument they have against the legalization of hallucinogens will crumble, and we can redeem the entire enterprise. So this is a very real and practical piece of news, which I hadn't intended to end on, but the question prompted it. Return to the plants is the message.
All right, so I had to finagle another nose and squish an eye next to another eye to make the bend work, but that's all right. It gives it kind of a looseness to the patterning, which is sort of fun. So I'll continue playing with that. We'll get everything dry before I start the next session of probably blackening the eyes before I start with the shadowing and lightening of the shapes of the noses and the rest of the features of the interlocked faces. So that's it for the moment. Thanks for watching. Have a good day, Earth.